Awesome. Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started here. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Laspada. I'm the engagement coordinator for the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind, or RWSC. Today, we're going to be talking about our implementation of our RWSC science plan this year and beyond. Emily Shumchenia, our director, is going to give a little intro on RWSC and what we do.
Excellent. Thanks, Christian. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces and folks that participate in RWSC with us today. I assume that many of you know us well, and I, as I just said, see many of you that do know us well. But for those that are new to RWSC, this is a collaborative initiative that was established cooperatively by the federal agencies, Atlantic Coast states, Atlantic Coast offshore wind companies, and a number of environmental nonprofits to serve as a coordination hub for offshore wind research to increase collaboration, limit redundancy, suggest common data standards, and increase data sharing and transparency. And our talk today, our presentations, are really centered around this set of functions. So in addition to all that, or more specifically around all of that, and as Greg mentioned this morning in the introduction to this entire workshop, the RWSC, in collaboration with all of you, just released a science plan in January that really specifies the research and data gaps and needs, including some data management needs. That's on our website at rwsc.org/science-plan. And the focus of our work since then and for the foreseeable future will be to implement that science plan. And so to do that, we not only refer to that kind of running list of research needs and data gaps that was captured in that document, but we continue to convene the 7 expert subcommittees. So you see those sort of depicted in the icons here: marine mammals, sea turtles, birds and bats, habitat and ecosystem, protected fish species, data governance, and technology. And so those are the bodies that are really real time, kind of giving us a sense for emerging data and research needs. We also assist partners, folks who are funding the research and data collection, in identifying how they can have the biggest impact given their experience, their expertise, their portfolio of work, and their current resources. We also aggregate and communicate information about who is funding what data are being collected, and try to promote and encourage interoperability where it makes sense. And to do this, we are, through the subcommittees, connecting researchers from various disciplines, providing a forum to have real-time collaboration occur, and provide recommendations and guidance for consistent data management and archiving, making sure that data are made available for decision-making and for reuse by other researchers as soon as is practical. So again, you're going to be hearing a lot today about how we actually do some of these things. So navigating this symposium, we're kind of going to give you a whirlwind tour of not only the subcommittees, but also the offshore wind and wildlife data ecosystem. So this is depicted by the icons you see here. We're going to talk a little bit about the research planning map. We're going to talk about our database of ongoing research and a new idea under development, an offshore wind and wildlife research data catalog. And to kind of walk you through all these elements, we're going to use the subcommittees and the leads of those subcommittees as examples for the type of work going on in all these areas. So we'll start with Samantha Coccia-Schillo, who is our GIS manager. She'll tell us about the research planning map. Zara Dowling, who is the lead for our Bird and Bat subcommittee, is unable to be with us for this workshop. She's on maternity leave, but we'll be telling you a little bit about what the Bird and Bat subcommittee is about, or what they're working on. Debbie Brill will talk about marine mammals. Jordan Katz will talk about protected fish. Sue Barco, sea turtles, and Nikelene will talk about habitat and ecosystem subcommittee activities. And I'll kind of interject here and there to orient you to all of these different tools and resources that they're helping us develop and that we're using to work on our mission and achieve our mission. So, very excitingly, we're going to pass the mic to Samantha.
Let's see. All right. Okay, great. So yeah, we're excited to share the release of our research planning map on the RWSC website. The link to it's up on the screen. The map displays locations of ongoing offshore wind research activities in the U.S. Atlantic waters. So examples of this include locations of deployed sensors, survey transects, seafloor mapping footprints, and much more. The map also has the Northeast Ocean data portal layers built into it for ease of accessibility to the depth of data sets that are offered through that mapping platform. So here's a quick flow chart depicting the process that we use for gathering layers into our map. So that process starts with each of the subcommittees and their members discussing and identifying data needs that we would like to see in the map. The subcommittee leads then work together with the GIS staff to identify the data source and whether that data is already collected and shared via another platform that RWSC could perhaps partner with to share the data on the research planning map, or we might be identifying a data gap that could be filled by RWSC. So we have developed some data collection templates for certain data sets, PAM deployments being one of those, that can be accessed via the subcommittee leads for data entry, and we also work to develop metadata for each of those data sets. Once that data is collected or perhaps sourced, it's sent to the GIS staff, it's turned into a GIS layer, and or if we find the source for that data, we pull it directly into our map. And finally, we make sure that the metadata and GIS data are both uploaded to the map, and we'll be showing a little walkthrough of that map in a bit. So this is just an example of some of the data sets, again, that you can find in the RWSC map. One of those data sets that actually just got put up are the locations of marine mammal aerial survey transects that was developed by the RWSC Marine Mammal Subcommittee together with a variety of partners. We also will be showing locations of deployed acoustic telemetry receivers for monitoring fish, sea turtles, and other species with acoustic tags. Jordan will speak to this a little bit more. And on the subject of bird and bats, we have MODIS antenna station detectors as well as a data set on there. And I'm going to hand it off to Emily. Try to do a
little live demo of the map tool. So this is the RWSC website. If you navigate to research and data and click on research planning map, it'll pull up the map loading in the background with this pop-up that describes that this is version 1 of this tool. We really wanted to put this out as quickly as we could to get feedback from all of you, actually. So we know that you all and additional folks, especially subcommittee members and folks that are funding the research, you might have ideas for how you might want to use this map, and we want to build those into this process. So the process to develop this map is a 2-year project. We're just ending year 1. The funding is coming from BOEM to RWSC to support this task, and we have contract teams, technical contract teams supporting the data development and hosting. That's the Duke Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab, and the folks that are building the front end of this tool are the same contract team that supports the Northeast Ocean Data Portal, and that's RPS Tetra Tech. And so as a group, we want to hear from you as users. And so we're hosting a public webinar on August 14th. Christian's going to have a QR code in a little bit where you can register, point your phone at it and pull up the registration link today. But we know there's a lot of different use cases for this type of map, and we want to hear from you and be able to build that in to what we do for the next year of development of this. So when you open up the map, it shows you the wind energy areas right away, but you have sort of a choice for the different types of data and survey types that you can explore. The example that Samantha just showed were the MODIS stations, so we can just click on bird and bat tagging and activate a layer. This is pulling right from MODIS, so we're not sort of downloading and duplicating data, we're able to link directly to their database and show it live on our map. And I just want to orient you, if you can open up these little pop-ups next to each of the layers, it'll provide more information about where the data came from, and any relevant metadata documents. So also, just to kind of steal a little bit of Debbie's thunder, I'm going to turn on the PAM deployment map too, because that one's really cool, and that one was built entirely by Debbie and the RWSC Marine Mammal Subcommittee. And this one has a really cool sort of time component where we're looking at 2024 status for deployed passive acoustic monitoring buoys, but you can go forward in time and look at planned buoys coming online for PAM, and you can go back in time and look at, what the PAM monitoring array looked like in 2022. So this layer in particular is really effort intense to develop. Debbie worked with all of the different data providers to pull this together, and you can see, sort of the complexity that we're considering when we put it on the map. So we want your feedback. We want you to not only add your information and your knowledge to these layers, but also work with us on how we can maybe streamline the information collection and aggregation so that we can update this as quickly as you need it updated. If you need it updated, every month, we want to make sure it's reflective of the conditions out there. So we'll tell you much, much more on the webinar in August, but just wanted to give you that quick demo to orient you to what we've been working on. And now I think we'll go back to the presentation, and Debbie can take over from here.
Yeah, could almost skip this slide with the great intro Emily gave me. But yeah, so I'm Debbie Brill. I'm the Marine Mammal Subcommittee Coordinator. We've been meeting since 2021. We've covered a lot of ground since then, but in the past few years, the subcommittee has really put a lot of effort towards PAM deployment coordination and planning. And that's included a lot of map making and dealing with spatial data. So we were really lucky to already have a lot of that data ready to go on the map tool. So starting with just the broad view, we have the regional PAM grid that acts as a guide for the deployment placements. We recently adapted the original Van Paris PAM design to incorporate some new information and to further guide those PAM deployments with a little bit more detail. For more detailed PAM planning and coordination, we started collecting actual PAM deployment locations using a standardized template to include helpful metadata as well. That template can be found on the RWSC website and gets directly fed into the PAM deployment map that Emily just shared. All the layer shows all of the deployed, proposed, and retrieved PAM deployments going back to 2020. As Emily showed again, one of the major requests was that people wanted to visualize the time element of these deployments to really help with planning. So we included that interactive time slider that allows you to toggle through the years to see the PAM deployments. And we also have all of the metadata that we collect in the template available within the map interface as pop-ups if you click on individual deployments. Some of the other non-PAM related map layers and subcommittee efforts, we recently accumulated track lines for most of the many aerial survey programs that are ongoing. Those include lines from the Northeast New England Aquarium, HDR, New York DEC, and CCS. We are also most likely going to turn our heads to boat-based surveys as our next map layer. And some of the future meeting topics that we're looking at are marine mammal tagging efforts and that technology, and also marine mammal health and stranding program coordination and ways that can connect with the subcommittee.
Awesome, thanks, Debbie. We also have some great acoustic telemetry data on the research planning map, so I'll let Jordan talk about that.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, so another layer of the RWSC research planning map that we're working to develop is the acoustic telemetry receiver layer, which obviously showcases the locations of acoustic telemetry receivers. So when we were developing the protected fish sections of the database and the science plan, we found that many of the active and planned projects funded for offshore wind were utilizing acoustic telemetry, and that even a lot of the research recommendations of the subcommittee were utilizing this method as well. So with that in mind, of course, one of our immediate goals was to coordinate regional research planning. So by placing all these receiver locations on a map, we're able to increase awareness of both actively deployed receivers and planned projects, which allows stakeholders to best leverage these existing resources. It also can work to reduce conflict with other ocean users, which can decrease the need for receiver maintenance and redeployment. And all of this reduction in duplication of coverage, can help us inform better use of funds and better science as well. So this coordination began with a joint acoustic telemetry workshop that the Protected Fish Subcommittee hosted with the Sea Turtle Subcommittee and other partners such as ACT, MATOS, and ROSA. Many of you may know that there's already an existing advanced system of cooperative acoustic telemetry networks in our region and even globally. So in our region we have ACT, MATOS, the FACT network, and the OTN. But what we found were that not all the projects that were funded specifically for offshore wind were participating in these cooperative networks. So we met as the development was beginning in the Northeast. We started working closely with ACT, MATOS, and ROSA to develop a workflow to get some of these receiver locations on our map. So there's kind of two different teams here. One, there's a group of receiver locations that are already available to the public and visible on the ACT MATOS website. So with that, instead of pestering researchers that already shared this information, we worked with ACT, MATOS, and OTN to get this information directly from them. So that saves researchers a step there. And then we have that second group who's not participating in these acoustic telemetry networks. So we met with them on different occasions, just to chat with them about their hesitations with joining some of these networks and just getting a good knowledge of their experience with acoustic telemetry thus far. And through these conversations, we were able to develop a handout that clearly and succinctly describes, the benefits of receiver location sharing and the benefits of participation in these cooperative networks. So speaking of the handout, we have many copies of the Coordination of Acoustic Telemetry one-pager. So please take one, please take more than one if you want, and you can reach out to us with any questions. We're all gonna be here all week, but we can also be reached via email. So I'll just talk a little bit about it. I know you guys are all gonna read it after this session, but what are we asking? So it's kind of two tiers. The first is just that for projects that are funded for offshore wind, acoustic telemetry projects, that you share with the RWSC receiver locations so we can include them on the research planning map for all ocean users to access. The second tier there, which is a little bit separate, but the participation in these cooperative networks, whether that's FACT, ACT, or the OTN, if you're participating in that, you can make your projects public or private. And either way, this allows for the regional participation in QA/QC and data management. And if you do opt in for participating in the cooperative networks, these groups will work with the RWSC to get your receiver locations directly for visualization on the research planning map. So you don't have to go through that step twice. So in order to best leverage this resource, consistency is needed from the first stages of research planning, to data analysis, and even movement data products. So yeah, especially because acoustic telemetry is utilized across multiple taxa. It's not just protected fish, it's marine mammals, it's sea turtles as well. So in addition to creating the acoustic telemetry receiver layer of the research map, The RWSC is also supporting the development of a best practices document, which is led by Dr. Beth Bowers of the ACT Network and Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that best practices document, Dr. Bowers is going to be presenting a poster later today. And yeah, next on the docket for the Protected Fish and Sea Turtle Subcommittee members, in addition to continuing development of the acoustic telemetry research layer of the map, is reviewing the next draft of the best practices document. That's it for acoustic telemetry.
Awesome, thank you, Jordan. As Emily mentioned, if you want to learn more about this data or the research planning map, you can attend our public webinar happening on August 14th. You can scan this QR code to register, or you can check out our website, rwsc.org/events, and register there. The next part of our RWSC data ecosystem that we'll talk about is the RWSC database, and I can pass it over to Emily.
Thanks, Christian. And I realized I forgot to advance my own slides earlier, so thank you for doing that. So what we've talked about so far with the research planning map is a tool that shows simply where research is occurring, right? It's just showing the locations of sensors, the locations of surveys or studies. What we've maintained for several years now is a database of ongoing projects in the form of fairly detailed profiles of each of those projects. And Debbie described how in some of the layers on the map, you can click on a point where research is occurring and it will pull up a pop-up. In that pop-up, if that project or that effort has a detailed project description in the RWSC database, there will be a link directly to that page. So we're looking to integrate all of these tools so you can, fairly easily navigate between them and kind of get the full picture of what we're trying to anticipate you might need to know as you're kind of learning about either offshore wind data collection or planning your own. So to make the database work, all of the sectors who are funding and conducting research share information about what they're doing. We have a really handy submit button on the database website, so you can submit your own project information to us and we'll QA/QC it and add it to the database. We aggregate all of this into a single, database that's accessible to the public, and you can also use this tool to filter or sort projects by species group or method or geography and even funder, which are all things we're anticipating that you want to do with this information, but if there's additional things that you'd like the database to do, we want to hear about that. Just to give you a snapshot of what's in the database right now, when you go to the website, it will be pre-filtered for you for only active projects, so things that have an end date in the future. And that right now, there's 89 individual projects. And this is sort of the breakdown. I don't know if you can read these labels. They're pretty small on here. So the majority of projects are marine mammal projects. The subregion that seems to have the most activity is southern New England. And in terms of methods, acoustic tagging is that big blue bar up at the top, and passive acoustic monitoring, archival passive acoustic monitoring is right under it. And I think that the reason that these two are the top is because they co-locate a lot of these acoustic telemetry receivers with passive acoustic monitoring, and so we're actually seeing duplicate. There's a lot of projects that do those activities together. So anyway, just giving you a snapshot of what's going on out there. Number 3 is water quality and oceanography studies. Number 4 is satellite tagging. And as you kind of move down, you get, eDNA is somewhere in the middle. Seafloor acoustics is at the bottom of that chart. But we're sort of tracking at that level of detail what's going on and who's doing that work. So we've not showed on here who's doing this work, but you can go into the database and find that out. So the segue here is to Sue and the Sea Turtle Subcommittee. Christian, I'm going to take the segue, sorry. Because she's made some observations about the database and its use for sea turtle research planning. So pass it over to Sue and pass the clicker down to Sue.
Thanks, Emily. Right, so we developed this database, and it was in development before the Sea Turtle Committee really started working. So one of the first things we did when the Sea Turtle Committee got together and started working on the science plan was to review the projects that identified sea turtles as a species of concern in their research. And in fact, I'm going back on purpose. sea turtles didn't have a whole lot of studies where they were identified, and when we looked very carefully at these studies, very few of those were specifically directed at sea turtles. Many of them were projects that were general aerial survey projects where sea turtles might be identified, or a whale-targeted or a bird-targeted project where sea turtle data would be collected anecdotally or as part of the protocol, but it wasn't the primary interest of the project or the project goal. And so one of the first things we were able to do is use our own research tool to then state that we need to have more sea turtle focused projects in the sea turtle science plan. So we actually used this tool quite extensively in developing our science plan for sea turtles. In many of the projects where sea turtles were identified, again, as a species of concern, there was really no clear information in the database about how those sea turtle data would be used and what the goal of analysis for those sea turtle data were. So again, although it looks like there might be 18 or 20 projects focusing on sea turtles. In fact, there are 18 or 20 projects where sea turtle data are being collected, but very, very few projects where sea turtles are the primary focus, and the experimental design of the project is directed at sea turtles. Yet all of the sea turtle species that we're working with in the RWSC study area are covered under the Endangered Species Act. So these may, in fact, be the highest number of endangered species, or the endangered species that represent the highest number that are impacted by offshore wind. We don't know whether those impacts will be positive or negative. In fact, we don't completely understand what those impacts will be. And that's really what the focus of the science plan chapter for sea turtles was. And what we identified when we really started to dig a little bit more deeply into sea turtles and the impacts that might occur is that we really don't know a whole lot. I came to this meeting in 2018 and was asked to give a talk about what we should be thinking about for sea turtles and potential impacts of offshore wind. And at the time, I thought I could do a little bit of research and come up with some papers and really talk about what was out there, and the answer was nothing. Very, very little is out there. And so that was the focus of our sea turtle chapter, and that's the focus of our continuing science plan actions that we're working on right now. We're certainly going to have to think very differently about how we focus our research on sea turtles and on other species as well. We are not the species group that has this problem alone, but we're going to be looking at compiling data from many different projects that are conducted at many different scales using many different methodologies. And this is to some degree a paradigm shift in the way research is conducted. And for that reason, we need to look at some other parts of what RWSC as a group is doing, which is looking at data governance. Sea turtle data are very much in need of standards and repositories and a number of other things that other subcommittee focuses have a little bit farther down the road than the sea turtle research community is. Right now, we have relatively few reliable baseline parameters with which we can study sea turtles in the RWSC area. And certainly we have to worry about the effects of climate change and teasing out the effects of climate change on sea turtles from any potential impacts to that species group. And in fact, we have a couple of species that we know virtually nothing about in some of the subregions of the RWSC. The smaller species are not being tagged very regularly. We don't understand their offshore distribution. And there's been, because of this lack of knowledge, there's very little mitigation or even monitoring of these species that's going on currently. So the existing data right now for most sea turtle studies are managed at the data owner's discretion, and we'd very much like to make sure that data are not lost because people are moving on, because they aren't funded to keep data in a format that is readily accessible, and they're not being shared. So we have quite a bit to do on the sea turtle front as well as in some other areas, but the work of RWSC is going to continue to make this possible.
Awesome, thanks, Sue. The last part of the RWSC data ecosystem that we'll talk about today is the RWSC data catalog, and I'll pass it back over to Emily.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, this is the third piece of that triad I showed in the beginning, this concept of a data catalog. So what Sue just described, and what many of you have described to us in terms of data management, is that there's a real need for sort of a single web-based interface where researchers and funders and other interested individuals can find all of the data. So we talked about a database that stores information about what research is happening and what projects are being conducted. There's a map where you can click on, the points and see what's happening at that location, but where are the actual data, right? And so to address that, we are in the process of scoping out and looking to develop a data catalog, which would basically, wherever data are stored in cloud-based repositories, aggregate everything into a single interface so a user could search by species group or topic and be directed to the essential metadata for that data set and a place where they can access and download it. So right now this currently doesn't exist. In order to determine how to actually do this, we had our data governance subcommittee do an assessment of all of the data repositories that were recommended in the science plan by the various subcommittees. This assessment builds on the NYSERDA Wildlife Data Standardization and Sharing Report, which came out a couple years ago. Only the data governance subcommittee specifically focused on whether or not repositories provide long-term storage and archiving of the data, and we're looking at around 30 years, because this is the lifetime of some of these projects, and whether or not the repository itself is compatible with the idea of a data catalog. Does it have machine-readable metadata standards that we can pull in a programmatic way and sort of catalog on a website, right? So the bad news is that of the 32 data management resources that are currently listed in the science plan, only 9 are true repositories, which means they have two-way data transfer capabilities. And less than half of those 9 provide either an API or some other way to programmatically aggregate the metadata for the data sets within them that would be compatible with a catalog. So we have a lot of work to do. And that is the segue to Nikelene's work and the work of the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee, which is just one example of how we're going to try to address this for one data type.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start by sharing that one of the major undertakings within the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee of RWSC in support of science plan implementation is the advancement in the development of this seafloor data repository. Now this seafloor data repository was initially developed to provide a platform so that offshore wind developers who are collecting seafloor data can have a forum through which to share that data. Since then, the original purpose of this seafloor repository was quite useful across the board, and so we received funding. NROC, the Northeastern Regional Ocean Council, received funding from BOEM, Mass CEC, that's the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management to allow us to develop a pilot version of this repository. We recently received funding from NROC and Barco to transition this pilot repository into a fully functional repository that RWSC's Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee will be overseeing in terms of its development and its use. And so the current aim of this seafloor data repository is to compile patches of seafloor data from various sources. And so this can include members of the research community, offshore wind developers, state, federal agencies who are collecting seafloor data. And we're currently interested in collecting multi-beam bathymetry and backscatter at 8-meter resolution because we think that that resolution would sufficient. I went past. Sorry, folks. So the seafloor data repository, we're currently interested in that 8-meter resolution for bathymetry and backscatter because we thought that that resolution would be sufficient to allow us to characterize different habitats within the RWSC study area. And so that extends along the U.S. Atlantic continental shelf from Maine all the way down to Florida. And so we're also interested in collecting shapefiles or CSVs of sediment properties as well as imagery. We think that this seafloor data repository is an extremely useful tool for us here within RWSC as it's going to help us advance some of our regional habitat mapping priorities. In the seafloor chapter of the RWSC Science Plan, one of the priorities that was listed is that we work on developing an Atlantic coast-wide seafloor habitat map. And so having a tool of this caliber where regional researchers or data collectors are able to submit their information would allow us to advance some of those efforts. So we're currently working with our the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee to advance the development of the seafloor data repository, and there are a number of features that we are working on adding. And the first of those features is connecting this repository to a secure cloud-based database for data storage. And we're also looking at including flags or tags to data for different levels of access. And we understand that there are cases where data collectors may be collecting data that is sensitive, or there may be time constraints on when data should be made available to the public. And so we want to make sure that we incorporate those considerations in the development of this seafloor data repository. We're going to be working with members of our Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee to facilitate the uploading of seafloor data. And we also invite other regional experts to upload their data so that we can test the repository and get feedback so that our metadata standards can be informed. And so as we work on the development of the seafloor data repository, we're also working to keep track of some of the seafloor data collection activities that are ongoing in the region by our partner entities. And so one example of one such entity is the Maine Coastal Mapping Initiative within the Maine Department of Marine Resources. And they are currently involved in seafloor. In 2024, there are a number of mapping priorities that they will be undertaking. And so they are looking to map an 840 nautical square mile survey area from the coast of Maine all the way out to their Maine research array, as well as the wind energy areas in the Gulf of Maine. And so they are hoping to gather a 4-meter continuous bathymetry and backscatter from shore all the way out to those wind energy areas. And we will be working with our colleagues from MCMI to, once this data is collected, upload that data to the seafloor data repository. And so we really encourage as many regional experts who are, conducting similar work to reach out to RWSC and utilize this seafloor data catalog, as it can be an extremely useful tool to help support regional coordination and help bridge some of the gaps that exist in terms of seafloor data along the Atlantic continental shelf. On that note, I'll pass it over to Emily.
I have my own microphone, but I'll take yours. Sorry. Great, thank you, Nikelene, and thanks everybody. Just to sort of wrap up here and take stock of what we all just heard, I think we presented on several different tools we're developing and maintaining to support regional research coordination. Just want to emphasize some common points among all of those case studies and lessons learned. We're to share information with RWSC. We're here to help aggregate and look across everything and provide sort of summaries and aggregations of that information. Participate in RWSC subcommittees. We didn't mention this, but they're entirely open to the public, and the Zoom link information, it's all virtual. They're all posted on our website. And for funders and folks doing the work, we encourage the adoption of consistent and interoperable standards and requirements for data collection and research. So when those are in place, it really helps the researchers do the work that they need to do and be able to manage their data. And while it's very important to allocate funds towards collecting data and conducting research, we argue that it's also important to allocate funds towards regional coordination, participating in RWSC and participating in these activities, and information and data management. We see far too few projects that have funds to actually do the data management and storage and organization that's needed after the research concludes. And so we very strongly encourage funds to be allocated in each of the projects towards that. That'll make all of our jobs much easier for our future selves when we go look for these data 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And with that, I think what we'll leave it with is some ways you can contact us, just key contacts and ways that you can stay in touch with what RWSC is doing. And at this point, we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, we have a couple questions in the C-Event app. We only have a couple minutes, but the rest of us will be here the rest of the week. If you have any questions, come say hi or contact us. The first one is taking into consideration the keynote from this morning, the PAM and acoustic telemetry buoy deployments could include oceanographic sensors as well. What do we recommend to facilitate optimization of deployments to be multi-sensored?
I'll take a stab at it. Everybody looked at me. It's a great point. We've had a little bit of that conversation with a few subcommittees. I mentioned co-deployment of acoustic telemetry in PAM, so there needs to be a conversation, I think, next with folks that are oceanographic data experts, and additionally, PAM data experts. There are limitations to all the number of things that can be put on some of these buoys for a lot of reasons, and we've learned a little bit about that too. So I think that's a great topic for a subgroup or a cross subcommittee work group to start thinking about. You want to add to that, Debbie?
No, I think that covers a lot of it. Part of the metadata that we collect, we do have a feature for if there is a co-deployment included in that. So you'll see in the metadata, it'll say co-deployment, yes or no, and then a list of all of the devices that are co-deployed.
And I'll just add, with acoustic telemetry receivers, there are a lot of sensors that are outfitted with those receivers to collect environmental data. And as technology advances, a lot of the receivers themselves are collecting it as well.
The next question is, how do we deal with quality assurance in the database?
How do we deal with quality assurance in the data repositories? That's a great question. The repository review that we conducted, so each of these repositories are independently maintained and funded, and it varies who is responsible for that. They are responsible for their own QA/QC procedures. So in the seafloor database, we anticipate having that discussion and determining if we need to do QA/QC of data, but for right now, our thought is metadata is our QA/QC, right? So if you upload data to a database and provide all of the metadata that we're asking, that allows a user to go into your metadata and determine if it's appropriate for their use, or judge for themselves whether or not they would like to use it, or the considerations for that. So we think that metadata can solve a lot of those problems.
Awesome. I'm looking at Kate. I think we're out of time. But again, if you have any questions for us, we're here all week. Contact us on the wall. Thank you, everyone.